morning, I'm John Boyle. I'm one of the founders of Oxford Computer Consultants back in 1989, and I'm delighted today to be talking to Dr. Reynold Greenlaw, who I've been working with since
1997.
1997.
Yeah.
And it's been a great pleasure working with you all that time, Reynold. So would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks. So my name's Reynold Greenlaw. When I joined OCC, I was a software engineer. I came from a clinical AI company. But AI in those days was different. It was much less mature, and data wasn't as big as it is today, and the techniques were still sort of had a way to go. There was a lot of promise, but I think really the first project I did with OCC in the innovation delivery team, which is our custom software team, that today, by today's standards, would be sort of understood and recognised as artificial intelligence, was a EU-funded R&D project called Emergent, and that was all about extracting data from social media when there's a large-scale emergency, like a flood or riots, and it was trying to understand from that very unstructured, very unreliable data, trying to extract actionable intelligence that could be passed to emergency services. And the use of AI in there, that's I think where I thought, yeah, this is really useful, this is really interesting.
I remember there was one really interesting aspect of that, which is that we were trying to detect what were real incidents from, well, what would now be called fake news. And because actually there would be people, activists who would deliberately try and divert the emergency services to a false location. So I'm interested in how we identify the difference between real and fake news.
Yeah. So actually during the project, there were riots in London, and later on there was this famous incident where people said the London Eye is on fire, and we mined the incidents around that. We mined the tweets, and you could tell, AI could tell that was fake. You look at people posting, you look at consistency, you look at the networks of people who are posting, and it has quite a different signal there. We tried different techniques. We ended up using Bayesian techniques. And what's interesting about that, for me, is that actually those techniques are what are used in common spam filters now. So that detection of good or bad data is now sort of widely spread in embedded practice. But Emergent was useful, and my first sort of introduction to applying AI. Since then, most of our applications we've done have been clinical.
Yeah. Yes, it was very interesting. This ability to try and take these data sets and identify the patterns. That was really. So what were how? To what extent did we get involved in the actual mathematical models? What were we doing on these projects, and how did we work with the AI experts, if you like, on those projects?
So on the R&D, on the first project, we were doing it all. It was an R&D project. We were working with a German university. But I think what I've found since then is that the demand for our services around AI are more around supporting data scientists than being data scientists. And they're more about embedding data science into applications that are either commercial or of commercial quality. So the next one that comes to mind would be working with two researchers who spun out a company from Oxford University, and they're looking at stress echocardiograms as the go-to triage method, really, for people suspected of having coronary heart disease. So, if you're suspected to have coronary heart disease, and that is probably the major killer globally, a stress echocardiogram is very likely, to be the first test, the first intervention, and it requires quite a bit of skilled human assessment, of what is a sort of quite grainy video of a beating heart. And these two researchers, very great researchers, so Ross Upton and Professor Paul Leeson from Oxford, had shown that using AI, you could get assessment of those videos, of those cardiograms, that is at least as accurate, if not more accurate than humans, and certainly more consistent. And they've done a great job.
One of the interesting points I noticed in that research when you were telling me about it was that quite often the AI was using different decision parameters than the experts. So the expert might look at certain elements of an image and say, I don't like the shading there and so on, therefore I conclude this might be happening. The AI was looking at the pattern and looking at different areas of it and reaching the same conclusions. That was fascinating, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, for example, in the assessment of a cardiac ultrasound, quite often what the clinician will do is they'll try and mentally kind of draw where the heart wall is and then look at the movement of the muscle. With AI, you can go straight from the raw image to a result. You know, the AI can miss out the... But there are other examples there. So the next project we did was more of a research project with the Department of Engineering Science here in Oxford. And that is, again, that's ultrasound, but applied to fetus, so the unborn child. So if you're going to provide healthcare to a pregnant woman, knowing the stage of the pregnancy is like a key parameter. It's a key parameter. And the established way of estimating that comes down to just what you said, which is making a measurement on the baby using ultrasound. It's the diameter of the brain. It's a good indicator of gestational age. And that's fine, but you need to be a trained sonographer. You need to be a trained person using this equipment to make that measurement. Now the AI can make that established method more accessible. So the Tracer project is a clinical trial which is global, and it uses a simple handheld ultrasound and an Android tablet, so cheap technology. And you can just move the ultrasound over the baby's head. It will take a series of images, and you can train AI to estimate the diameter of the baby's brain and therefore the gestational age. It's interesting there because in other applications of AI, you're often trying to do things that people can't do.
Yes.
But here we're just trying to get more people able to do an established process.
You're just going back to what you were saying about the R&D project, the Emergent project on social media data.
Yeah.
It wasn't as much fun as my first R&D EU project, which was, I managed to get a project with truffle producers in Bordeaux. I had to go over to Bordeaux.
I can see the appeal.
I had to help them sell truffles over the internet. Actually, it was early days of e-commerce. Anyway, I just wanted to point out that sometimes these things can have...
Can I say how disappointed I am that part of the company doesn't exist now? And
there's a photograph of my
truffle
in the office if you need to any inspiration.
If I could have company truffles, I'd be very happy.
Yes, quite.
What I wanted to say is also with... I say that we've found a real demand for our services, which is around working with data scientists rather than being the data scientists, and that's a theme. I think all the different techniques there are in AI, if you're going to embed AI in a commercial application, you really need the software engineers who understand those techniques.
Yes.
So, Tracer, that uses a convolutional neural network, which is a common technique for image analysis. It can handle the sort of what's called the curse of dimensionality that you get often when you're trying to analyze images. Our job is to understand that, but then to make it usable. That's the whole point of the Tracer project.
The curse of dimensionality.
The curse of dimensionality.
Explain that for me.
It's an AI term. If you have a simple image, you might have one that's 1,000 pixels by 1,000 pixels. If you have the wrong AI algorithm, it's going to treat every pixel as independent. So it's got 1 million points there. Let's say you've got RGB colours on every point, you've got 3 million points. But you're missing a trick. An actual image, a real life image, is an image of a surface or of edges. And the pixels are not independent of one another.
Right. Yes.
And so you use a mathematical technique called convolution to sort of simplify that problem.
And how important have the mathematical skills in your team been? Because I'm aware of projects where workers come out of the university and the model didn't actually quite do what it claimed.
Yeah. So it's important because first of all, sometimes we can contribute, and we can suggest ideas, and at least, at minimum, we're talking the same language as the data scientists. and that really helps the whole project fly. We also understand when we're getting into sort of danger points, when we're getting into edge cases and things, and we're able to sort of pick that up and suggest ways of handling it. Yeah.
And do staff recognise they're working on AI and get a particular?
Yes. Yeah. They're very popular. They're the projects that often the staff sort of come to me and say, I want to work on that project. So, I mean, that actually happened recently with working with the Oxford Parkinson's Disease Society. That centre, they are, cutting edge, pushing the boundaries of our understanding of Parkinson's disease.
Yeah.
And it turns out, it may not be one disease, it may be many diseases. It turns out that the disease may start quite a long time before the symptoms appear. The symptoms of Parkinson's disease are largely movement disorders, even though it's a neurological cause. And the fact that it's movement means that you can measure the symptoms using a smartphone. Smartphones are just loaded with sensors, accelerometers and gyroscopes. Yeah. And so, we wrote an app which they use to measure the symptoms or estimate the symptoms of Parkinson's disease and follow the progression. They are experts. They're a great team, and they've brought in a data scientist from Oxford again, who's using random forest regression to look at the accelerometry data and map that to the scales which Parkinson's disease is measured. And again, we're there providing the kind of application infrastructure that the machine learning needs to run on.
And when these applications are working with medical devices, one then hits the question of regulatory compliance and so on.
Yeah.
So how have you coped and helped with that aspect of?
Yeah, I mean, my professional career has been medical devices. So certainly we have got AI. We have seen projects go through FDA and CE approval and become regulated medical devices. There's one thing I haven't seen yet, which is where the AI will self-train and change, as it goes along in a medical device. So I've only seen where you train the model and then effectively you kind of bake it. And that goes through the clinical trial, that gets approved, and that goes out there. I've seen that. The clinical approval of AI, which was going to self-train as it goes along, I have not seen.
Okay, interesting. And for all this time, you've now had a wide exposure to projects involving AI in your team. So if we gave you a 3-year sabbatical to go and do a PhD, what area of this fascinates you? What would you like to go and research and maybe develop some new concepts in, some innovation in?
I think first of all, I'm going to talk to David Clifton.
Yes, quite. He'll probably take you on willingly into the department.
And I'll tell you, let's do something. I mean, my passion is being the bridge between the research and what you might call the real world, a bit of a disparaging phrase, but end users. And actually, I might do something, I might not do AI, I might do something associated with it. I would do 3 years on the UX of AI, the user experience, the design, what makes AI usable in society? How do you embed it into phones and cars and whatever? In a way that people find not only acceptable but usable. So if I'm going to pick one, smart speakers for dementia.
Okay.
Smart speakers for people with dementia, I think and that voice interface and that companionship at some level.
Yes.
It interests me.
And I think it's interesting. I got you to explain sort of elements of multidimensionality and so on, but we have to be careful with this jargon. I ran into trouble with this early on with my father, because my father also does AI. In fact, we were both at university together at the same time doing AI. And whilst
My father did AI.
My father did AI. So my father was one of the leading experts in AI.
Yes.
And he was doing artificial insemination, and I was doing artificial intelligence. And we were at university at the same time. And so, one needs to be very careful. You can sit for a long time at an event realise that. So I just kind of was interested to finish, Reynold, with wondering how do you present the vision of AI to somebody, you know, who is not a technologist? How is this an exciting development that's going to be of benefit to society?
I think as I think we're agreed actually. I would avoid the terminology. So I would avoid the terminology. I would say, we'll talk about, you know, your car can drive itself. You know, your phone can help you. It already helps you navigate, but it can help you plan a journey. So it'll also tell you now get out of the taxi, get into the go to the railway station, buy this ticket, go here. I think that kind of and building networks of people. I think I would avoid the terminology generally, and there's been a sort of speculation for years now on whether terms like computer might disappear.
Yes.
You know, completely. And we just talk about toasters and cars and doors, but we expect them to be intelligent.
Well, it's like we don't walk into a room and go, "Ooh, electricity," do we?
That's right.
But we still go in and go, "Great, the Wi-Fi works."
Yeah.
Thank you, Reynold.
All right, thank you.